started. We've got about 35 people on the call. I suspect a few more will be joining in shortly. But good morning from the Regeneration family. It's really, truly great to see all of you and many more that I can't see that have dialed in and are participating in the call. We've been leading webinars for our clients with the intent to educate on timely topics. So we don't do this all the time. We do this when there's really something important to talk about. And unfortunately, we have a timely topic that not only impacts our clients, but nearly everyone everywhere across the globe right now. Last week, we introduced Managing HR Pandemic. Our speaker was Tony Bridwell. Tony is an HR expert, and he is the senior executive in charge of people with Ryan. Ryan is a perennial top 100 place to work in the United States. And judging by the feedback that we received, Tony did a fantastic job. If you got on the call last week and would like a recording of that call, just please ping either Ellie or myself, and we will send you the link so that you can hear the discussion. Well, this morning we continue our series with a discussion on the government stimulus package. So please welcome Mark Solomon and Peter Bogdanow. Peter, if I butchered your name, please say it for us when you get on. But Mark, if you would please wave your hand so people can see you on screen. This is Mark Solomon, and Peter, if you would as well. So no confusion, just make sure and wave your hand for us. Okay, fantastic. So welcome, gentlemen. Glad to have you here. We need some help understanding this. This is something that was rushed out to the public literally 2 days ago. I got my first inkling of it, what it would look like. Had a bunch of clients and colleagues that were saying, we need to get moving on this. Unfortunately, there's been nothing to move on until really literally this week, 2 days ago. And so let me just give you a little bit of background. Mark, raise your hand again, Mark. Mark is the managing partner of Catton. Catton is a global law firm. He's a managing partner in the Dallas office, and Mark represents clients with business operations really all over the world, and his relationships with leaders throughout the community give him a lot of insight into what's going on. And we've known Mark for several years, really impressed. Some of you that are on camera know Mark because you worked with Mark some. I saw a bright smile show up on the camera there when I said that. So really delighted to have Mark. And Mark's partner, Peter, really focuses in on the private equity sponsors as well as family office, individual investors, and maybe most important for this call, family-owned, family-managed businesses. And he represents both buyers and sellers. And I think that we're going to find a lot of interesting insight from Peter because he's been looking at this from a number of different angles. And so while he's a leading M&A attorney, he structures and negotiates joint ventures, capital market transactions, and investments for minority and controlling stakes in family businesses. So with that, I would open it up. Mark, if you'd like to just make a comment or two, and let me tell everyone, kind of get the format of what we're doing. You can type in a chat question to me or to the group. If you want it private, it gives you the option to just type in a message or a question to me privately. I will then ask the question on your behalf. If you prefer to answer or ask the question publicly, just raise your hand and I'll call on you. I can see most everybody, not everybody, but I can see about 25 people on the camera right now. So just raise your hand if you have a question and you want to ask it. If not, go to the chat function, send me a private chat, and I will ask the question. Interestingly enough, when we announced this webinar, we received 3 questions in advance. So I've got some questions teed up for these guys. But Mark, why don't you kick it off? Give us a minute or so about whatever you want to talk about, and then Peter, if you'd follow that, and I'll stay quiet.
Great. Well, thanks, Jim, and it's a pleasure to be here. I think probably the first thing we'd want to say is our thoughts and wishes go out to everybody that's dealing with this right now. I don't know if folks are on the East Coast. if you are. We know it's very difficult there. My father actually lives in New York City, so I get updates every day. And we're thinking of you, and it's just hope we will all get through this difficult time. The legislation we're going to talk about is unprecedented. It's new. It's less than 2 weeks old. It's more than 1,000 pages, and there's no regulations. So a lot of the questions we have, and Jim gave us a preview of a few of them, we can answer them as best we can. For some, there's probably not answers yet. But I think you'll find that we have a lot to say about it, and hopefully will be helpful. The legislation deals with all sorts of issues. Peter and I, and Peter laughs at this, I always say I've worked with Peter for 20 years. It's really been a lot less than that. It just feels like that to Peter. But we've been, but our business is mostly representing private equity groups. We represent a lot of strategics also, but the issues that private equity groups are facing right now and are looking at with this legislation are very similar to what family business owners are. So I think we're well equipped to answer a lot of the questions. But there's a lot out there that we won't talk about. Certain of our clients that are in the financing space have a number of different questions that you might have. There's issues that are tax issues that may be beyond this call that are also interesting. Even nonprofits are addressed in the new legislation. And if you want to ask questions about that, we'll do the best we can to answer. But it's very thick, it's very new, and we're getting through it as rapidly as we can for everybody. Our firm, so our firm has almost 700 lawyers. We're a global firm, but we're predominantly in the United States. We have a broad practice that deals with all areas. And one of the questions I know that Jim has is, where can people find information that's fairly simple to digest about the bill? Our website publishes probably an article every day on different aspects of the bill. And so please go there. And this is a shameless plug, but I think it'll be helpful to everybody. It's www.katten.com. So please feel free to go there for information. And with that, I don't know if Peter, anything else to say, and then we'll turn it over to Jim.
Thanks, Mark and Jim. I couldn't help but decide that my background was boring, so I decided to put something more pleasant behind me. So I hope everybody enjoys that. That apparently had options to upload pictures of my kids, but I'm not sure whether I'd find a good one there that would be appropriate. First of all, it's nice to speak with everyone. This is, I have been with Mark a long time. I even was with Mark during the last Great Recession. I've experienced a number of difficult situations in my life, but this is, right up there. And it's been really trying to watch everybody suffer for this, and have everybody stuck at home. So we're happy to be on this call and talk about what's going on and what we can do to help. And if Mark didn't say this, we have been following the recent legislation. We have a task force of people dedicated to following it. And so if we don't know a question on this call, we're happy to follow up with you or follow up with Jim to get you the answer. By way of example, the CARES Act was passed 6 days ago and has 1,100 pages of statute in it, not to mention all the regulations that need to be issued under it, none of which have come out yet. But I don't want to take any more time up. Jim, thank you for the opportunity again, and we look forward to this conversation.
Okay, well, thank you, Peter. Thank you both for participating. So just to be clear, they're not offering legal advice to you today. This is an overview conversation, and you'll need to talk to either your representatives or call us, for specific steps that you might take as a business owner. But having said that, would you guys please just kind of go over how much money is being allocated into which buckets and such like that?
Mark, do you want me to take that, or do you go?
Yeah, I thought you would take it, and I'd be the color commentary.
Yeah, that works. So I'll do it this way, and then feel free to add or add questions. So there's a $349 billion program for the payroll protection loans to small businesses. That's the so-called SBA loans that you've heard about that I think we're going to spend some more time on it. And there's an aggregate of $500 billion allocated to loans to other businesses, states, and municipalities. $29 billion is for passengers and air cargo carriers. $17 billion is for businesses critical to maintaining national security. The balance of that is the $454 billion program that's loans to businesses that are more than 500 employers. I like to refer to that only because I think some of the politicians called it the slush fund, because it's just money that the Treasury and the Fed has available to allocate to businesses. It's really not a loaded comment coming from me. It's just easier for me to remember it that way. This is kind of all the loan programs out there. There are, tax credits, tax deferrals that are also part of this legislation, and also part of the Families First legislation, which was the sick leave law. The tax credits there, by the way, are just to kind of help pay for the sick leave. That is my high-level summary. I'll pass it over to John Madden here.
Yeah. The only thing I'd add to that is we were fortunate enough, Rob Kaplan, who I know Jim and Ellie know, and maybe others do too on this call. He's the president of the Dallas Fed. And he gave our internal board at Catton a presentation a week ago. And he explained just how unprecedented the Fed's action was a few weeks ago. And even though the numbers are big, and it is, as Peter said, often referred to as a slush fund, it just shows how far in front of this the Fed is in terms of trying to keep the economy going.
Okay, let me get into some really detailed questions, and I've got a couple here. Let me go ahead and read one that came in. I'm getting questions on my text through chat, and I have some already backed up, but this one just came in on chat. It's unknown if this is the first to come, if it's a first come, first serve environment. Would it be recommended to apply for a PPP loan immediately, or wait until cash flow starts to become strained? Now, I'm not sure what PPP stands for, so maybe you guys can respond to that one first.
PPP is the Paycheck Protection Program. The government's always very good with acronyms or abbreviations. And the short answer to that is yes. I recommend moving quickly. One of our partners that has kind of spent, the last 2 weeks studying this bill as it was coming out and then being enacted, had a conversation this weekend with one of the SBA lenders and said basically there's going to be a line out the door, and so it's better to at least get in line and try to get the money. I think there will be an application process. It will take some time, so you will have some time to reflect on it. But if it's something you're thinking about, don't wait.
Okay, fantastic, good. So help us from a high level perspective. Who qualifies? How do we know that, do 100% of the people on this webinar qualify, or do 10% of us qualify? What are the qualifications? And I realize that there are several different silos of money, from payroll protection to bank, relief or lending relief to, so give us some sense of who qualifies.
So I'll start. For the Paycheck Protection Program, that's for small businesses. And the shortcut is that you have to be less than 500 employers. There are other ways to qualify if you meet their small business definition, but in most cases you would expect that if you're over 500 employers, you probably fail the other tests.
Peter?
Yes.
So the government typically defines small business as anything under $35 million. So this is a different definition of small business, correct?
That's correct, Jim. And that is sufficient. And so to get it. And so there are affiliation rules that apply to the Paycheck Protection Program. There is also the economic injury disaster loans, which are smaller and generally people aren't as interested in those. The affiliation rules don't apply to that. What that means is that if you own a collection of businesses, then the SBA wants you to kind of count all your different businesses to see if you're under 500 employees. And by the way, these rules go on forever. So, just kind of, you have to kind of think about whether your business controls another business. And so that's the base qualification to get these loans. There are requirements for what you have to do with the loans, which I know are some of the other questions that we're going to get to later, so I want to address that. And Mark, I don't know if you have anything to add on that. And I see there was a chat question I was just going to look at real briefly. So.
Yeah. I mean, I think that the only thing I'd add is there are a few exceptions to the aggregation rules. And basically, when you're counting 500 employees, they do go back to the small business statute where you're looking for companies that are under common control. So for private equity groups, most of their affiliated companies are included. There are some exceptions. It was a fairly intense lobbying effort, as you can imagine, that was led. And for some of the fast food franchises, my understanding is Domino's led this, they were able to exempt from the aggregation requirements different separate locations for restaurants. So there's that exception. There's also certain exceptions for companies that have SBIC financing. So there are exceptions, but as a general rule, that 500 employee rule, it aggregates all companies that are under common control.
Okay. So let me go to another couple of questions here. So for the payroll protection plan, when will the online portal application open? Our local bank is an SBA preferred provider, but it seems to have not been given the go-ahead from SBA on the actual portal process as of yet. That's a pretty detailed question. Good question. Where are you? I'm looking for you on the monitor. There you are. And do you all have any comments about that?
They say that the portal is actually supposed to open as early as tomorrow. There's been serious discussion about whether the system's going to crash. And I honestly don't know whether that's in jest or not, given other historical experience and just all the problems people are having using various portals right now. But that's currently when they expect it's going to open.
Okay, good. Somebody reached out to Bank of America, and Bank of America, B of A, responded that banks don't have a time frame yet on the processing of applications, but we are prepared to accept and process applications as soon as the government and SBA allow, which we think is on Friday. Is that a known? Is that an accurate? I've read Friday as well, but is that what we're going on at the moment, right? I wish we had more information out. Everyone is working diligently to get this in place as soon as possible, but B of A is on the forefront of this effort. As soon as we have additional information, we'll share it with you. So that was their response yesterday from B of A. Sounds, probably that's a common response, is that they just simply haven't had a chance to run through the 1,000 pages of information required. So I don't know if there's any comment about that, but
well, one thing I would say about that is, people are, this is for loans under the CARES Act. The thing to remember is that whoever the SBA lender is going to be, they feel they're going to be on the hook if the government ends up determining that a borrower wasn't eligible. So part of what you might see is delay, but they may end up being a little bit more stringent than you would expect in ensuring that you comply, at least with the requirements in the front end for the loan.
Okay. So a question came in, many of us in family businesses are defined as under 500 employees, so therefore small businesses. Many of us outsource so many of our key functions in the business. These are independent contractors and so forth. How do we keep these relationships in place going forward when it's really a payroll versus a 1099 employee? How do we keep this in place? And I've kind of added to that question, but that one just came across as well. So Peter, Mark.
I am looking for something. First of all, and this thing is moving so fast, I apologize if I'm behind on this, but I believe the guidance still hasn't come out completely from the SBA. And there was some discussion about whether independent contractors should be covered. I think looking at the statutory language, you don't really have any options, but you know, I think that's still kind of an open question right now.
Okay, so the code that I read, Peter, thank you. And I don't know that I have the most current, but I've got the IRS, you know, employee retention credit available for many businesses financially impacted by COVID. So this came out yesterday and I read through it last night. Luckily, it's about 18-point font, so it was an easy read, so thick number of pages. It does include independent contractors, but for example, if you have a search firm that is being compensated on placement, whether it's a success fee or it's a retainer or a investment banking group. I know because I see two people on this call right in front of me. You know, one is an investment banking M&A professional and the other one is a search professional. Well, these guys get retainers to do their work. So how does that, they're independent contractors, obviously, but how do they get compensated? Do they get compensated? I guess is really the question. Is there relief for those individuals?
I'm looking again at that document, which I know you sent to me as well. Just bear with me.
Okay. While you're looking that up, Peter, I will ask, I'll go to Mark.
Yep.
Kick it over to Mark. Mark, we have a question from Pennsylvania. Is the money a first come, first served? If they don't move quickly on this, will it dry up and go away?
In theory, it should not, but it could. But one of the reasons we're telling our clients to try to get in front of this is harking back to Katrina. It took 5 months on average for people to receive money. The government is pledging that it will be sooner, but we're all anticipating just an absolutely unprecedented backlog in applications. There's going to be new legislation. We know there's going to be a fourth act coming out where there's going to be more, more monies to support small businesses and other businesses. But we're telling everybody to apply early. Is it possible? It is. I mean, there's only so much money in the legislation. I think that the government will do everything they can to make sure that doesn't happen. But the bigger issue, I think, is just there's going to be so many applications. Just getting in line, businesses are going to need this money. It's going to take time. So the sooner the better. So we're telling people to try to get in as soon as they can.
Okay. A kind of a comment question along the same lines. The application process for PPPs launch on April 3rd. If you have already applied, should you reapply again? So there's a rumor going around that the big guys will get the money first. Any insight about how this may or may not, I mean, you hate to be someone that's got 100,000 employees and, will they be pushed ahead of someone that's got 7 employees?
Well, remember the PPP program is expressly for businesses with less than 500 employees. Now there can be some big guys in there, like Domino's and some of the restaurant franchisors, but for the most part, that is for small businesses. The other programs, primarily those run through the Fed, are for larger size businesses. So I don't know if I'd be that worried about being pushed aside. I again would be worried about just how long it's going to take. And the concerns about the system crashing that Peter mentioned, that's, we're almost expecting that. So that would be my advice, is to get in early because of that.
Okay. I think we got the message. Move quickly on this. So
Hey,
another
Jim?
question. Yes.
I'm just looking at this IRS publication, and it's really not that clear in my view. I think that, it says that if you're the independent contractor, you can apply for the loan if that's what your business is. It also says that you can use the loan for quote unquote payroll costs. And then there's a question what it includes payroll costs, and it says salary, wages, commissions, or tips capped at $100,000 on an annualized basis. So, it's written in a way that, you might be able to fit it in if you are paying independent contractors. I just don't think it's entirely clear from what I'm reading.
That was my take of it as well. So let me go to the next question. Great question. Should we apply for the payroll protection loan through our bank directly, or do we need to go through an SBA portal?
You should go through the banks that are SBA eligible lenders.
So what's the process for that then? Go to our core bank, our primary lending bank, if you have more than one, tell them you want to do this, and will they then refer you to an SBA, or will, in most cases, these don't most all banks have an SBA portal?
Yeah, I mean, I can't really tell you how they're going to approach it, and I don't have any confidence they're all going to be ready for you right now, which is, again, why we urge you to go quickly. And if there's an application that works through this portal that the SBA is supposedly going to have available tomorrow, I would. I just, beyond that mechanics, that's really up to the banks how to handle that.
Okay, so we have a comment, a response to that from Houston. Max says, our bank told us, related to this specific question, our bank told us that we applied to them as well, and they will handle from there. Once it gets to the SBA, his bank told him that it will be handed back to us. Did I get that correct? Did I say that correct, Max?
Yes, you did. That's
Okay.
exactly what they said. They said
Okay.
we'll be back, and they had nothing to do with it once the SBA gets involved.
Yeah. So I think that it's good to share this information and have this information. My concern is that how many banks do we have in the United States? And all these banks are reading the regulations at the same time. They may have different interpretations of it. The big banks obviously will have departments working on this. The smaller banks will be attempting to interpret this. So don't take any of this as gospel, but take this as the questions that you might go to the bank and ask. So, okay. So Arlissa says that she has a very helpful guideline, a PDF form from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce that shows the calculation that what can be reimbursed for the forgivable part of the loan. Arlissa, email that to me and I will get it out to everybody along with the follow-up recording. So thank you for that. Okay, let me ask, kind of shift gears a little bit. This is a very nuanced question from somebody who is very much in the details. And he asks, larger corporations, can they address the details of the larger corporation loan facility that the Fed and the Treasury are setting up? I don't understand the details of that one. Now, that may be beyond the scope of this call, but let's put it out there. You know, can you address the larger corporation loan facility that the Fed and the Treasury are setting up? Do you know anything about
that? So you're referring to the $454 million program that's going to be run by the Fed there are various different sub-programs that they use to that. And it's designed for businesses with 500 to 10,000 employees. The rate on those loans will not exceed 2% with no interest or principal due for 6 months. And there's a number of strings that come with it, which are generally more onerous than the paycheck protection provisions. You have to retain at least 90% of your workforce at full comp and benefits through September 30th. And you have to certify that you're going to intend to restore your workforce, 90% of your workforce that existed as of February 1, no later than 4 months after the emergency ends. You can't outsource jobs during the term of the loan or for 2 years thereafter. There's certain provisions related to collective bargaining. You have to be organized in the United States, have significant operations and employees in the United States. The Treasury is going to get an equity interest of some form in connection with the loan or guarantee. And there are limitations on what you can pay compensation to your borrowers. I have it here as $425,000. Well, this applies to people who made less than 425. I don't know what that means. More than 425. And you can't do stock buybacks or pay dividends within 1 year following the repayment. That must be during and the 1 year following repayment. So, they, again, like the paycheck protection, the intent of the law is really to support the workforce, and so they don't want kind of money being used for other purposes.
Yeah. And the $425,000 limitation is for officers receiving that amount. It can't go higher than the amount for the year after the loan is made. Although they can't have an increase in pay.
Charles from Dallas here wrote that the form on the PPP shows 2.5 times average monthly wages, but we need to include rent, utilities, etc. How do we determine the amount we should request?
I believe the requirement is that they're going to fund up to the lesser of 10 million and 2.5 times the payroll. But you are allowed to use proceeds to pay for rent and utilities. The SBA has advised that they're going to require, and I don't know how they plan on doing it, that you cannot do more than 25% of the loan to pay rent.
But what's important is the amount of the loan is for almost everyone going to be solely on payroll, irrespective of rent, utilities, and other things you can use the loan for.
I see. Francois, are you waving with a question?
Yeah, I just wanted to chime in. The 25%, my understanding, applies to the reimbursement, the forgiveness of the loan subsequent to this. So they only, if the loan is applied to your use for payroll, they will forgive the loan as long as 75% of the loan is used for payroll. So, but you can use the other comment I want to make, Jim, also is that to the earlier question is that I would urge people to apply for the loan with their bank, the banks that they have a relationship with, because we heard from some of our clients that actually banks have refused to take application for people that have not been client of the bank. And obviously certain banks have, have elected not to participate in the program as well. So when you apply for the loan, which you have to apply through your bank, not through the SBA, go to the bank that you have a relationship with.
That makes sense. Go ahead.
Let me just add something. That's definitely correct in terms of how to go about it. I agree with that. And I'll just add something that I think is at least worth pointing out. Everybody's interested in paycheck protection because of the loan forgiveness component, as they should be. the loans are still available if you don't satisfy some of these requirements, and they are attractive interest rates in some cases with no guarantee or collateral. But the forgiveness starts to fall away. And I know there were some questions about this. If you start to, reduce your workforce or cut the pay of your workforce, now I guess the question I have is whether you'll actually be able to get the loan if your intent is not to get the forgiveness, but that's kind of up to the banks, I believe.
Okay, so let me go through a few more questions. Make sure and email me or text, or excuse me, not email, but chat or text with me. I've got a couple on my texts. Let me review this. I'm going to read you this. We have been spending a lot of time on this topic, so I think this may be a little bit redundant, but one individual submitted their application to their bank yesterday. Wow, that's fast. So good work there. And the bank came back and said that they're still waiting on the SBA rules and regulations. I think that's what we don't know until Friday. Someone may want to mute if there's a puppy dog there. Any idea when the rules and regulations will be out? I think we said that begins on Friday, not before that. Is that correct, gentlemen?
Yes.
That's the expectation.
And I guess the second part of this question is, for purposes of calculating the amount of an application, what is the relevant time period? Do we know that yet? Is it from February 2019 to June 19, or February 19 to June 20, or a 2020 time period? We have to calculate the wages somehow. And there's a second part to this question that I'm going to ask, but do you want to respond? Do you know that yet? Well, let me go to the...
Well, I'm not sure if this is the question. You have until June 30 to restore your workforce if you want to get the forgiveness. But I'm not sure if that was the question.
Well, here's a question that has to be on everybody's mind. We've had clients that have experienced dramatic changes in their revenue overnight, as some of the people on this phone call certainly have experienced, but these are huge reductions. Whether or not the company will even be solvent and be able to make it through this period of time or not is a whole nother question. We're not talking about small companies. These are 9-figure companies. So lots of employees, lots of activity, a national footprint and such, and a couple of clients like that. So here's a question, maybe more philosophical, but the question is, if my business was suffering before the COVID-19, and now we get hit with the COVID-19, we must lay off people. How do we go about calculating, how does that factor into applying for any kind of payroll relief, payroll support? So we can't let a company that simply cannot survive continue to hang on to people. There's no work for them to do, for one, because there's no customers walking through the door, so to speak. How do you manage that, or how do you think about that?
So I'll start out by saying that these loans aren't going to be perfect for everyone, and I know that it's a struggle, and I know that even getting through June 30 may not be sufficient. That the time periods that are required by the law are that if you reduce your full-time equivalent headcount during the 8-week period following loan origination. And it's not the same as it was starting on February 15th, 2019 through June 30, 19, or January 1st of 2020 and February 29th of 2020. By June 30, then you will start getting the impact of these loan forgiveness reductions. So if you've already started to make reductions prior to February 29th, then if I'm reading this correctly, and I want to read one more thing before I officially say that, then you're covered. But if you waited until March to start making changes, then you're kind of trapped by how these rules work if you don't get back to full capacity, by June 30.
And that kind of brings back to the whole issue of, there is, in your opinion, there is a sense of urgency to start moving on this sooner rather than later, within the next 2 weeks anyway.
Yes.
Exactly.
Okay. Okay, we are getting flooded with some questions. So again, may be redundant, but do we all qualify in one way or another, either for the loan forgiveness or the payroll protection plan? Everybody basically in business, as a business owner, as a business senior decision maker, everybody basically can play in that pool. Is that correct?
There's kind of no requirements to get paycheck protection other than you meet the size standards and that you satisfy the affiliation requirements. So you've got to be below 500 employees, and then the other program that we talked about is available if you're more than 500 employees.
Right. That's a much less crowded field of companies. The vast majority of business and industry in the United States is less than 500 employees. So.
Absolutely, and that's why it's so difficult to watch what's going on right now.
Okay, I have a very specific question here. We're in the hotel business. Our room count went to basically 0. We can't just keep our staff employed. There's nothing for them to do. We had to cut back immediately. Does this ruin the chance of receiving any aid? And
so if you can't restore by June 30, then you won't get the loan forgiveness amount, or the amount of the reductions will be applied against the loan forgiveness amount. You still are eligible for the loan. Again, if we're talking about the Paycheck Protection Program, and it does have a low interest rate, and this is purely my speculation, but I wonder if a lender is going to be less likely to give you a loan if they don't think you're going to qualify for the loan forgiveness.
yeah,
And that's the concern. And the thing to remember is, Peter said, it's not perfect, but the primary purpose of these loans is to encourage economic activity through fuller employment, and that's why we have these 90% provisions, that you have to keep 90% of your workforce in place. So it is difficult for a lot of folks. We have clients that are also in the hotel industries, and they're facing the same issue.
so let me see if I can balance this question. And Kevin, I see you're on the line. Feel free to jump in and help me ask this question correctly. The choice is cut back on employees, significantly, or wait for payroll protection at some future date. But if you don't have the cash to cover the employees at the moment, we may be forgiving, or we may be losing the opportunity for payroll protection if we make too many changes today, so to speak. Is that correct? Did I say that correct? And there's a gentleman on the phone that discussed, I was talking with him about it. He's a controller of a significant business. We were discussing this as a possibility. Any comments from Florida? So did I say it correctly?
Yes. You know, let me just read the way one person explained this to me, so you understand the dates. So if your full-time equivalent headcount is lower in the 8 weeks post-origination than it was during those prior periods I read, so again, February 15th to June 30th of 19, or January 1 to February 29th of 2020, then you'll be reduced by the amount of the reductions in your forgiveness. If you make reductions between February 15th of this year and April 26th of this year, and you get back by June 30, then that doesn't count against you, even though, you know, that you might fall within that 8-week period I previously mentioned.
Okay. So a really good question here that just popped up, and I've got about 50 questions here, so I'm not going to get to all of them, but we have one here that says, are we actually talking about the retention of employees? I think this question is not complete. Let me say it differently. Are we talking about the retention of the amount of payroll? Or are we talking about the same number of people?
Yeah, that's a good question. I asked that question too. It does look to the amount of payroll. So if you did across the board salary reductions, you'd have the same problem. And again, you could rectify that if you get everybody back by June 30.
Okay. Let me pause. Does anyone on camera that has not typed in through chat have a question? I don't want to leave you out. Okay. So one of the questions is, and maybe it's a comment, this thing is not going to be over according to the world of Jim Hutcheson and regeneration. This thing is not going to return to normal anytime soon. Our basis for thinking of this is we're going to remember when the stock market was at 2,900 and we had national unemployment of 3%. Those are very, very, very frothy numbers. That's not a normal. We were over our skis. We are ahead of ourselves with 3% unemployment. We're ahead of ourselves, and the stock market was very overvalued, and people have been saying that for several years. So when we return to a normal, that normal is going to look very different than it did in January or mid-February 2020. Very different than that. And when will people return to a normal, and then what does that new normal actually look like? And if you factor all that together, you know, we may be sitting here for a much longer period than we're led to believe, like, okay, now we can go back to work. But going back to work may not look the same as it did in mid-February 2020. So it's more of a commentary kind of opinion page here, but please, Mark, why don't you take that one?
No, I think we agree, and there's a number of reasons for that. Even when we get to a point that we feel that we've gotten past the apex of all the of people contracting coronavirus, it will take a while for people to feel comfortable to go back into work, to travel again, to do the things they did before, just because people aren't going to feel safe until there's really testing everywhere. It's going to take a while. There's also industries that may change forever. You know, there's a lot being written right now that people are telecommuting pretty well. I don't think any of us are as efficient. We miss the human interaction. It's not as good. But I think for most industries where you can telecommute, where it's not necessary to be in, you know, whether it's retail, hospitality, or otherwise, people are getting by. And so there's a thought that as we exit from this, and I know somebody is on this phone that has hotels, it may be a different world. There may be less travel. For people that own office buildings, there may be less occupancy. People may decide they really don't need the space. You know, for restaurants, retail, entertainment, it may just be different. People may be staying home more. So those industries may be changed forever. We don't know what that's going to look like. I think the third issue is if there are, and unfortunately it's hard not to foresee this, a lot of bankruptcies, the loss, it's not just the loss of those companies. It's not as though you lose a company and it goes away and somebody fills in. The loss of human capital, the loss of knowledge that goes along with that is going to be something that's sustained for a long, long time. And so we do think the world is going to look different, and, you know, don't want to sound apocalyptic, but it's going to take a while to get through this, even after we get to a point where hopefully there is not a second wave of the virus. But even after we get to a point where people are ready to go back to work, we do think the world's going to look different.
Thank you, Mark. Peter, do you have anything you want to add to that? You're on mute, Pete.
Just trying to keep out the background noise, sorry. I agree with all of that that was said. Mark and I both participated in a presentation yesterday about kind of what to expect in the near term. And I mean, I think that a lot of people did feel that, you know, we were due for some trouble anyway. And so I don't know that we can kind of get back to where we were even when the fear is gone, but clearly in the kind of retail, restaurant, travel, hospitality space, we just can't expect people to kind of go back immediately, and that'll certainly have repercussions throughout. You know, but there'll also be, you know, with those changes will come opportunities, you know, so if anybody that recently bought Zoom stock, then, you know, let me know what your next tip is.
Okay, good. So we've got some people on the webinar that are experts, and I want to take just a minute, have not rehearsed, not told them I'm going to call on them, but I'm going to ask a few people to comment. So David Katzen is an ASA certified business appraiser located here in Dallas. David's done tens of thousands of business appraisals. David, what is this doing to valuation of businesses at this moment? If someone comes to you and says, I want to value the business, want to transfer ownership in the company to my children or to whoever, what does this look like today compared to 2 months ago? I think you're on mute, David. You're on mute. Still on mute. Okay, I think David's having a technical difficulty. So you may not have you may be plugged in, you may need headphones or something like that. So David, if you can figure that out and come back with a response. In the meantime, Francois DeVischer is an M&A investment banking professional, been at it, working with family companies longer than anybody in the country, was the founder of DeVischer and Company, and is now gently retired, still working, consulting on some cases. But Francois, where do you see the valuation of businesses at this point?
Well, I think I would address that in two different ways. I think the silver lining of this, you know, coming into this crisis compared to the crisis we had in 2008, 2009, is that there's a tremendous amount of liquidity in the market, as you know, as we know, private equity funds, as an example, have over $2 trillion of committed capital right now, and that goes for the larger ones as well as the. So And those are all basically funds that will find its way back at some point, which will drive, obviously, valuation. The flip side of that, obviously, is that I think that the valuation, obviously, post COVID-19 and the disturbance that it made to earnings and EBITDA will be significantly reduced. But at the same time, I think the valuation, in my opinion, will be also restructured in transaction in different ways, i.e. more of the compensation to sellers going into earnouts as opposed to cash, or other incentive program that basically would think. So the valuation question, which obviously given the decline in earnings that companies will experience, will also be reduced. But I think from a multiple perspective overall, including incentives, including earnout, may actually be not as reduced as the absolute number of earnings coming down.
Okay, thank you, Francois. David, were you able to join us?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, yes.
I figured it out. Wonderful. Clearly, it's been very significantly impacted. We have actually postponed or delayed a lot of our clients' valuations where we're doing it for transfer purposes, succession planning, just because a lot of the market pricing data that we're using is dated back in December, maybe early January. And of course, things have changed significantly in the interim. So we are delaying a lot of those valuations to take advantage of what we think have been obviously significant impacts to value. There was a study that came out in recent days that we've been looking at, which shows a 25% increase in our risk premium adjustments in calculating our capitalization rate. So it's going to have a very significant impact. The real challenge for the valuation community, though, is how you deal. Is this a shorter term impact? Are we going to come back with a more bullish outlook in the future? Or is this going to be, like I think Peter was mentioning, I don't know who, or Mark, I think it was Mark who mentioned this, a long-term psychological impact in terms of loss of human capital and so on, and how does that affect the valuation? But I can tell you, we are being much more aggressive in the community with our selection of discount rates, lower capitalization rates. And in some businesses, we're just holding off completely, like in the restaurant business, just to see how it all shakes out. So it's in transition at the moment, very difficult, and we're postponing evaluations just to see how it all shakes out.
Thank you, David. Okay, we have time for one more question. This one comes from me, and I'm sorry if we couldn't get to your questions on the chat. There's plenty there. We do end at 11 o'clock sharp, so I know Mark and Peter, if you all need to sign off, feel free to do that. We just so much appreciate you. We've got one more question that I want to put out there. Whoa, lot of money into this stimulus package, a lot. Who's going to pay for it? And don't say you, Jim, because I can't go but about a quarter of a second.
It's Mark, and I have to hop off right now. And by the way, we're doing a webinar today. Our firm is on SBA loans under the CARE Act, and I'm going to try to get that information to Jim and Ellie, and hopefully, if anybody's interested, they can forward it on to participants if you'd like to be on that call. Unfortunately, I think that we're all going to be paying for it, and for generations to come. We're not done. There's going to be more stimulus coming down the road, and I think we'll be paying for this for a while.
There's an ambivalence between my property taxes. I pay high dollar property taxes for where I live, and yet the services and the schools and all of that stuff has been collapsed to nothing. my property tax is going to stay high? Are they going to drop along with the quality and the advantage of services and such, or are they going to go up? Because some of us, you know, if you're high net worth or something like that, you may be paying greater taxes. So just kind of thoughts and ideas. I remember that, you know, after the Depression and World War II, personal income taxes rose up to 70+%. Every dollar you made, 70 cents went to the government. So, Peter, any thoughts, ideas about, you know, where we might be headed?
Yeah, sure. I'll start out with something a little bit more optimistic.
And let me just interrupt you 1 second. We do try to keep these calls to exactly 1 hour so people can plan their time. So we've already had several people drop off. So don't feel obligated to stay if you want to, if you have to move on. But Peter, please.
Yeah, and just real briefly on Mark's shameless plug, if you do go to our website, there is a webinar at 1 o'clock that'll be pretty granular. But
1 o'clock Central Time.
That's correct. Notwithstanding the little background I did behind you, I'm actually here in Dallas. But so one thing that I read recently is a reminder, the TARP program, the bailout in 2008, 2009, the government actually made money on that. Now there was a time value of money there, and there's certain companies they invested in that didn't do well. And so, you know, this loan facility at the Fed, they'll get some of a return on that. I don't know if they'll do as well as they did in TARP. And obviously, a lot of this money's gone. A lot of these other tax incentives that they've introduced are ones that are really just time value cost. And ultimately, that's money that we won't spend in the future. For example, moving a net operating loss forward. But look, this costs a lot. And as Mark says, I don't think we're done. And as a general matter, you know, I think that, you know, kind of where our, you know, budget is relative to where our taxes are is kind of a problem. And that was already coming to a head. And this unfortunately just made that a little, you know, worse. So I don't have anything positive to say other than to say that it's something I think we had to do now. We may have to do more, and we'll have to figure out how to deal with it in the future.
Okay. So let me make sure I understand you correct. We're all going to be paying for this for a long time. Did I hear you correctly?
Absolutely. There's no denying it.
All right. All we can do is smile and say, we'll just wait to see how that all unfolds. So thank everybody for participating today. Ellie and I and Regeneration are just grateful for you guys. I do want to make it very clear, we will be having a series of continuing webinars. We have one that will be on meditation and the importance of mindfulness and meditation. Nate Hutcheson, my son, my great son, will be leading that. And that will be an abbreviated, probably a 30-minute webinar, because finding that balance is important in life. And Nate is a certified meditation coach. We will also have a session devoted to outplacement in a pandemic. A lot of people are being laid off. How do you do that since you can't meet face to face? You can't interview with potential companies. There are not a lot of companies that are actually hiring at the level of outplacement. But what do you do about long-term employees that are no longer going to be with the company? Kurt Vandermatter is an outplacement and a recruiting specialist at the C-suite level and below, mid-management level up. And Kurt will be putting together, or has put together, a presentation that he's used in the past. But this is an area that Kurt Vandermatter knows a great deal about. Encourage you all to participate in that. It will have some relevance. And then lastly, what we know about the human is that those that live the happiest, most fulfilled, and accomplished lives have a greater sense of resiliency, bouncing back. Remember, this thing will end at some point, and we will all need to bounce back in a way that maybe we have never had the opportunity to experience. So Dr. Michael Cofield and his partner, and our partner, his wife and our partner, Marianne Zimmerman, are specialists and experts in this space, co-author of several books, the Roadmap to Peace of Mind series. And Dr. Cofield and Marianne will be presenting a webinar on resiliency. We have to come back from all this. So with that, as always, email, text your questions, ideas, thoughts. If you have other things that you want to see in a webinar, we will do our best to find the leading experts in our country to speak on the topics, and we've done that so far. So with that, all we can say is be safe, make sure to wash your hands, and keep your social distancing in place. And thank you all. Be safe. We look forward to speaking with you.
Bye.
Thank you, Jim.
Thanks for the opportunity to speak with you. Good luck, everybody.